Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're diving into the mind-boggling mega engineering of a country that literally pulled itself right out of the ocean. We're looking at a masterclass in survival, a story of human ingenuity taking on the absolute, relentless power of the North Sea. You know, for anyone fascinated by how we interact with our environment, the Netherlands provides the absolute ultimate blueprint.
Just think about your own country for a second. Now, imagine if nature had its way, and a staggering 26% of it simply didn't exist on dry land. Well, that's the literal reality of the Netherlands. Like, if the ocean wasn't being actively held back right this second, a quarter of the entire country would be completely underwater. And yet, somehow, 17 million people live there safely. They're commuting, working, and raising families on ground that the ocean is desperately trying to take back.
And because of this extreme geography, cities are essentially sitting at the bottom of a massive bowl. I mean, the ocean is sometimes a full 7 meters above street level. It creates these completely surreal sights. Picture massive cargo ships sailing on waterways that are literally elevated above the highways. Yeah, legally, the ship has the right of way over the cars below it. It completely breaks our mental model of how geography is even supposed to work.
But hey, this isn't just a story of building one giant wall, it's an evolution. We're going to trace the century-long journey through 3 distinct eras, shifting from basic, brute force earth-moving in the early 20th century to highly advanced, dynamic defenses, and finally, getting into a radically modern philosophy of engineering.
So, let's start with Era 1, brute force against the North Sea.
Back in the early 20th century, the strategy was pure, unapologetic muscle. The goal was super simple: push the sea back. Engineers tackled this with shovels, endless manual labor, and this audacious plan to build a 32-kilometer perfectly straight wall across the violent open ocean, separating the North Sea from what eventually became a tame inland lake. But they didn't just build walls to keep water out. Oh no, they literally reached into the sea and pulled out an entirely new province called Flevoland. They trapped a patch of the lake with a ring dikes, and then they just started pumping. And here's the crazy part. Those pumps have been running continuously since 1942. They literally cannot stop, because draining the water compacts the clay, which makes the ground sink even further, so they have to carefully manage the soil's water levels 24/7. It is an entirely artificially sustained environment.
But, you know, nature is relentless, and it struck back with terrifying force. On January 31st, 1953, a massive storm surge funneled directly into the Netherlands. At 4 a.m. in the morning, while whole villages were fast asleep, the dikes broke. 150,000 hectares of land went under in a single night, and tragically, 1,836 people lost their lives before dawn. It was a true national trauma.
That tragic, inciting incident fundamentally changed the nation forever. Just 17 days after the flood, the Dutch government issued a clear mandate: never again. And this sparked what honestly seemed like an impossible plan. They decided to shorten their entire coastline by 700 kilometers by plugging the vulnerable estuaries. And they were going to pull this off using massive structures that had literally never been built anywhere in human history.
Which brings us to Era 2, dynamic defense. The Dutch quickly realized that a static, solid wall just wasn't going to cut it against the North Sea, especially when it came to vital shipping lanes and ecosystems. Initially, they tried building solid dams to seal the sea inlets, but they quickly found out this was destroying absolutely everything living thing inside the estuaries. The saltwater ecosystems were just dying off. So in a wildly bold pivot, they actually scrapped the solid dams. Instead, they spent billions to build 62 moving steel gates. These gates stay open during calm weather to let the tides and marine life flow naturally, and they only drop down, with a tiny 50 millimeters of clearance, mind you, to seal the coast when a violent storm hits.
Now, defending Rotterdam, which is Europe's busiest port, required a different scale entirely. I mean, you can't just build a dam across a massive shipping lane, right? Enter the Maasland Kering. Get a load of the specs on this thing. We're talking 2 swinging arms, each one heavier than the Eiffel Tower, pivoting on these massive 680-ton check ball joints. But the most fascinating detail for sure, the entire 6,800-ton structure is governed by an autonomous computer system called BOS. When a storm surge threatens, 0 humans press a button. The computer decides, the computer commands, and the computer seals the 210-meter riverway all on its absolute own.
Steel gates are amazing, sure, if you have a billion-dollar budget, but what about the smaller, vulnerable villages? They couldn't exactly afford a heavy steel fortress, but they still had waterways that were way too wide and too important to just leave unprotected. So what happens then?
Well, the solution was an absolute stroke of genius, an invisible armadillo dam. Most of the time, there is literally nothing to see. But when an alarm sounds, 3 flat rubber bladders lying hidden on the riverbed are pumped full of air and water. In just one single hour, they rise up into a 10-meter-high Kevlar wall, and it's incredibly resilient. If one tube bursts, the redundant secondary bladders hold the line. This entirely hidden system successfully fended off a 9.1-meter storm surge, protecting 110,000 people without a single crane or steel gate in sight. Absolutely wild.
Moving right along to Era 3, symbiosis with nature.
Decades of fighting the water eventually led engineers to a brilliant plot twist. They recognized a fundamental truth. A permanent war against the sea cannot be won with force alone. The ocean is just too strong and, well, the climate is changing. The old method was simply to build higher walls. If the sea rises, just make the dike taller. But eventually, you're just living in a deeper and deeper bowl, sitting around waiting for a catastrophic failure. The new method flips this entirely on its head. Stop building higher walls. Instead, lower the land. Intentionally invite the water inside, but do it strictly on your own terms.
Consider the sheer scale of this project, known as the sand motor. 21.5 million cubic meters of sand. Instead of constantly dredging and adding sand to weak coastal spots every few years, which, by the way, is incredibly expensive and super inefficient, engineers basically dumped 20 years' worth of sand into one massive artificial peninsula all at once. And then, they just walked away. They let the ocean waves and currents naturally distribute those millions of tons of sand along the coast entirely for free, fortifying the beaches exactly where they need it most.
This exact philosophy birthed the Room for the River program. Rather than funneling surging rivers between increasingly high concrete walls, they gave the floodwaters somewhere safe to go. They intentionally dug a brand new 9-kilometer river channel right through active farmland. Think about that. They literally sacrificed agricultural land to create a designated flood zone. It fundamentally changed their defensive posture from fighting the water to directing it.
And the return on investment for that sacrifice is staggering. By giving the river room to expand into that new channel, it drops the catastrophic flood peak by exactly 27 centimeters. Now, okay, 27 centimeters might not sound like a lot, but when a storm surge is pushing hard against the dike, that tiny margin is the difference between a secure town and total inundation. That 27 centimeters literally saves entire cities from going under.
Because of these 90 years of relentless, evolving engineering, there have been exactly 0 flood deaths in the Netherlands since 1953. They've systematically raised their flood safety to a 1 in 2,000-year event standard for the entire Rhine region. They built a literal fortress against the ocean. But, as this final quote reminds us, the water is always there, always waiting. And it leaves us with a profound, sobering question to take away from this explainer today. As sea levels continue to rise globally, how long can human ingenuity outsmart an ocean that never sleeps?